I'm going to teach you this incredibly simple two-step method to effortlessly memorize Chinese words and never forget them. I've used this exact method to memorize thousands of Chinese words, and I still use it every day to improve my spoken Chinese. Now, the first step is to use mnemonics instead of rote memorization, and there are 6 different keys to successful mnemonics we're going to walk through in just a moment. The second step is something called context, the essential, perhaps even more important component that allows you to actually use the word accurately and fluently in conversation. Let's start with step 1, mnemonics. I spent 3 hours every day for 9 months on a website called memorize.com, repeatedly reviewing the entire HSK 1 to 6 vocabulary list. After 9 months, I could regurgitate every single definition for well over 5,000 Chinese words and pronounce them accurately, but I soon discovered a big problem. I didn't actually know how to use the majority of these words in conversation, and even worse, I started forgetting what most of the words meant after a few weeks of not reviewing on the website. I was learning words using the worst possible method, rote memorization. What makes this kind of rote learning so ineffective is a lack of understanding, a lack of connection, and a lack of context, which makes it impossible to relate to the material and hold on to it long term. My brain saw all these words as irrelevant nonsense and so promptly removed them from my brain to save space for more important things. So the question really is, how do you become connected and relate to a bunch of squiggles that make up Chinese words? The best answer I've found by far over 10 years of learning and teaching this language is mnemonic devices. A mnemonic device is one or more connections you create between the new thing you're trying to learn and your personal memories. The more dense with sensory and emotional information the links you create are, the more effective the mnemonic will be. The perfect mnemonic to learn a Chinese word will contain a personally memorable link for the characters, the pinyin sounds and spellings, and the definition. Now, ideally, all of these are personally relatable and easily summed up using a single mental image that must have a sensory component, ideally visual. Now, does this sound overwhelming or even impossible to do in any short amount of time? Well, that's where my 6 keys to success come in. These will make it almost effortless to generate tons of mnemonics and memorize upwards of 100 Chinese words per day easily. Plus, you don't even have to make these mnemonics yourself, because later I'll go over how to use ChatGPT to make them for you. So key number 1 to the perfect mnemonic is accurate usage. So when a word comes up in conversation or while immersing, or if you're just starting out, building your initial vocabulary using a list of some kind, the first thing you need to do is make sure that you know how the word is truly used. Now, for simple nouns like 汽车 meaning car, this obviously isn't a problem. But for more abstract words, I like to first check out some example sentences to see it in its natural habitat. You can even put the Chinese word into an image generator like ChatGPT or DALL-E, or a straight up Google image search to see how it's represented according to native speakers. Let's use the word 体现 as an example. Now, this word can mean to embody or to reflect something. It can also mean to appear in a certain way. Often that English definition is not enough to fully understand how it's used, so just quickly check some example sentences or have ChatGPT provide some and explain it for you. Even if you just have a rough idea of how the word is used, that's good enough to start with, and it's better than nothing. You will deepen your knowledge of the word further through context later. This mnemonic step is just to make the first sighting of the word super memorable, so it stays in your long-term memory long enough to fully acquire it through repeated exposure later on. Some words you'll just be able to master them instantly. Other words will require lots of input and repetitions before they're fully acquired, especially words that are slang or have a lot of pop culture references involved with them, or that just aren't that common. Key number 2 is character definition link. You want to create a link between the meaning of the characters of the word and the final definition. So let's go back to our 体现 example. The 2 characters are 体, meaning body, and 现 means either present, as in present tense, right now, or to show or appear. So we think about the definition here of the 2 characters and how they relate to the final definition of to reflect or embody. 体现. So you could think the way a body appears is how it's reflected in reality. And just as a cool thing about this, the more foundational knowledge you have of characters and words, the better, as there is more to draw from. So you might not be aware, for example, that xian actually has two majorly different definitions, and you can use either one of those definitions in creating the mnemonic device. Oh, do not worry about the real etymology of the word and the characters within the word. Just look at the definitions and try and make some connection of some kind, literally in just a few seconds. Now, while I love the logic of this word, 体现, meaning to embody, it's not enough to make a really great mnemonic. So let's add a visual component to it. Now, how could you visually represent the two meanings of these characters, body and present or appear, and make them interact in some way to produce the final meaning? Simple word association is the best here. So when I see the word body, I think bodybuilder, the Greek god statue, or maybe even Jesus, the body of Christ. With present, what comes to mind when I think of present? I think immediately of meditation, monks being present and in the moment. Now, for the other definition of xian, meaning to appear or show, I think about a magician pulling a rabbit out of a hat. So all I have to do then is link these two images that represent the two characters and link it to the final meaning of reflect or embody. So the immediate image that's coming to mind for me is a skinny guy meditating with his eyes closed in front of a mirror, and he sees in his reflection his muscles getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But we're not done there. Let's move on to key number 3, sound definition link. So if you can add in some sort of link to the pronunciation, that's going to further deepen your knowledge and memory of this word. Now, while my visualization of the skinny guy turning into a muscly guy while meditating is acceptable for sure, it is also ideal to include elements that will represent the pinyin spellings or sounds. The more connections, the better. So T is pronounced T-I, T. So just think, what links does that come up with for you in terms of other Chinese words pronounced in the same way or a similar way, or even other words from English or other languages you know? I'm British. When I hear tea, for example, I think of a cup of tea. So that's my immediate reaction. But maybe if I was Spanish, I would hear tea and it would sound more like you in Spanish, and maybe I would think of a connection based on that. You can also use the fact that Chinese has very few pronunciations to your advantage and think of a homophone in Chinese that also sounds like T. So for example, T means to kick in Chinese, or T as in raise a question. You can even make a sound connection based on how the word as a whole sounds. So T xian, if you say it in a certain way, it could kind of sound like teasing. So maybe I could connect that in some way to a visual mnemonic device. So if I was going to really soup up our mnemonic device of the skinny guy meditating in front of a mirror, I might include him drinking a cup of tea with a piece of string, T and xian. When he drinks that tea, it causes him to become really muscly in front of that mirror while he's meditating. Key number 4 to make the perfect mnemonic device is personal connection. So if you're finding a new Chinese word hard to remember, try to relate that word to personal experiences, emotions, or stories, ideally positive ones. And the more specific and personalized the connection, the better. This idea was shown perfectly in a movie that I watched way too much as a teenager called Road Trip. The main character, Josh, has a philosophy exam the very next day that he hasn't studied for, and his highly intelligent friend says that he can teach him everything he needs to know in just a day. When asked how, he says,
"Yeah, I can teach Japanese to a monkey in 46 hours. The key's just finding a way to relate to the material."
He then goes on to teach Josh in terms of his favorite interest, wrestling, comparing Socrates to Vince McMahon. This beautifully illustrates the importance of being connected to what you're learning. The more connections you create, even artificially, the more hooks there are. The more hooks there are, the more the thing you're learning becomes sticky like Velcro. So it's not just some skinny guy turning into some bodybuilder. It's a specific bodybuilder he becomes. He turns into Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I don't think of just a faceless meditating person. I imagine Eckhart Tolle, the guy who wrote one of my favorite books called The Power of Now, all about how to stay present. The 5th key to creating amazing mnemonics is to not aim for perfection. Do not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Go fast with this. Aim to do every single mnemonic in just a few seconds and go with your first instinct. Don't chop and change and second guess yourself. So just look at the word, think about the characters, what they mean, and then say it out loud a couple of times and see what comes to you. You do not need to add all layers of this mnemonic guide to every single mnemonic device. In fact, in most situations, one of these elements alone will be enough to make that word super memorable. So please don't think that you have to keep adding all these layers with every single word. For me, new words come up mostly while I'm busy. I'm immersing in something, I'm listening to an audio book or a podcast. So I enter the word or an entire phrase or example sentence into my flashcards, and I try and think on the spot of some connection there. That's usually enough, and if I still don't remember it the next time, I will add a new layer to it. Oh, and speaking of layers, let's add in the final layer by introducing the sixth and final tip. Use ChatGPT or some other AI to come up with an image based on your personal connection. Now, just that process of searching for the image and looking at it is more than enough in most cases, but you can also copy that image and put it into a flashcard. Now, ideally, you come up with mnemonics yourself, but if you can't come up with anything after a few seconds, maybe a minute tops, or you're just feeling lazy, then you can use our chatbot. Here's how to do it. So what I'm going to do is hit generate, and as a word comes up, I'm going to make a mnemonic on the fly and walk you through that process. 夜晚, meaning night. Now this one's really logical. So the characters here mean 夜, which means night, and 晚, which means evening. So I would imagine the characters are really obvious. I don't really need to look that up because it's like a noun. It's not very abstract. So what I would do for this one is I would just imagine the moon and the stars, and I would imagine a recent evening I spent outside, like with my family and fireworks, for example. That happened the other day. We were using sparklers and stuff. I might imagine that evening, get some image from ChatGPT or something to add to my flashcards, if necessary. I might just think of the image in my mind and move straight on. But we might want to add a pronunciation element to this. So, 夜晚. Now, 晚, I think of bowls. 晚 in Chinese is bowl. Different character, same pronunciation. Yeah, I just think of like partying. So I think of maybe that image of me and my family outside with sparklers, but we've got some loud music on and we've got some lights going as well, and we're all throwing bowls around and smashing them because, you know, it's a bowl party. Yeah, 晚. All right, let's go on to the next one. So this word has 3 letters. It's more like a phrase technically. 开玩笑 means to play a joke. So to 开 a joke is to just tell a joke or be joking. For example, in Chinese, you might say 开玩笑, 开玩笑 after you've told a joke, just to make it very clear. Now, you might not know this, so it's a good idea to go to your Pleco app and look for some example sentences to see how it's used. Oh, I'm just joking. I'm just joking. Now, the 3 characters involved are 开, meaning open, 玩, meaning play, and 笑, meaning smile. So open, play, smile. Now, when I think of open, I think of a can, like that sound when you open a can. So I imagine that there's a bunch of little kids, like maybe even my own children, I might imagine them sort of standing there still, and then someone, maybe me, opens up a can like that, and then they're allowed to start playing and smiling. This character can also mean 开车, as in to drive a car. 玩笑, 玩 again means bowl. I could say 玩 as in a bowl. I can involve bowls again. For some reason, I do that a lot. Just keep the same connection in terms of the sound and use it a lot throughout different mnemonics. And 笑 can also mean a ton of different things. Thank you, Chinese, for having such few pronunciations and tons of homonyms to work with and homophones. So 笑 also means school, like 学校. So again, that's connected to children as well. So I can imagine a child's playground, maybe kids driving around in a car. There's all sorts of connections, and sometimes you'll get so many connections that come to you. Just choose one, and it could just be a single one, doesn't have to be multi-layered. Think of an image in your mind and just move on. And then maybe if 开玩笑 comes up again, or you want to say the word joking in Chinese, 开玩笑, but you can't remember it, then maybe your mnemonic's not strong enough and you need to add another layer. And that layer could be referencing the actual thing that you're weak at, the thing that you're forgetting. So if you're forgetting the meaning, then add more elements or more intense elements with more emotional connection in your visualization that represent character meanings. And if it's the pronunciation you're not getting, maybe add a pronunciation element to your mnemonic. So 注意, that's an interesting one. It's quite abstract. It means to note down something, or really to notice. 注意, pay attention to, and check out the character meanings. 注 is a very formal way of saying to pour something. And yi means, well, meaning or significance. So when you're pouring meaning into something. Now, of course, that logically, just pouring meaning into something, saying that out loud is not enough. We want to visualize it as much as we can. So I would imagine something that comes up that needs to be noticed. When I think of that, I think of, I recently read a book called Unreasonable Hospitality, all about 5-star restaurants and Michelin star restaurants. That is the connection that I make when I think of noticing. That's hospitality. It's all about noticing the customer's needs. So I think of like a really high level waiter noticing everything. But that's not enough for me. I need to make it visual. So I'm thinking of a specific waiter from the movie Ratatouille. At the end, which I recently watched this as well because I have a 3-year-old son and he loves that movie. So at the end of this movie, Ratatouille, he's running around on rollerblades and he's serving everyone's drinks really quickly. So that is the image that I'm thinking of for this. 注意. So that's one of the images, but what about meaning? To pour meaning in something. So I think that comes from the heart. So I imagine him sort of like pouring wine and water just straight out of his own body into someone's drinks in the restaurant. That's kind of a weird sort of image, but the weirder the image, the easier it is to hang on to and the more memorable it is. And it really only takes like a second or two to make these connections. Now, as this is the last word, let's also add a pronunciation element to this mnemonic just to show you how this could be done. So again, 猪, that reminds me of pigs in Chinese. Yi is a very common pronunciation. I'm thinking of Yi, the number 1 in Chinese. So there's just one big fat pig in the restaurant. He's the only customer, and this waiter is pouring wine for the pig out of his heart, which is where his meaning comes from, out of his chest here. So let's see what kind of AI image we can actually conjure up with that in mind. So it connected the word 猪 with zoo in this case, and you'll see a unique E. Okay, so it's connected the English word unique, animal, with the pronunciation of E. The animal is so captivating that it pours its ideas into your mind, making you pay extra attention to it. Whoa, check that out. Now that is really cool. Your personal image and your personal connection though might be even more powerful than this. So just remember that your own brain and your own personal life and memories could well be far more effective than any amazingly awesome and cool AI image that this can generate. But still, this GPT is not only really fun, but it can speed up the process for you. And we also trained this GPT to give you 3 more suggestions after the initial one. And you can just type in a number. Say, for example, you prefer number 2, like, visualize a character from the movie Zootopia, intensely, as well, meaningful, intensely focusing on a meaningful clue, linking to the idea of paying attention. So we can just put in number 2 and it will automatically explain that in a deeper way and provide an image for it. This one says Zootopia, it can't do that because of copyright. How about zookeeper then? So we'll just type in number 3. Picture a zookeeper paying attention to each animal's needs. This scene symbolizes the act of taking notice. Yeah, I actually prefer the original, but you get the idea. Okay, so I think we've covered effectively now how to create amazing mnemonics very quickly for Chinese words. So now let's talk about step 2, context. Now it's important to remember that the goal of everything we've learned in this video so far is not to learn lots of Chinese words. Our goal is to speak fluent Chinese. To use a word fluently and accurately, you first need to see and hear that word in an understandable context, often many times. Now, I've heard that the average is 10 to 20 times for a word. Now, if that's actually true, then by applying what we've covered so far, creating amazing mnemonics, I'm confident that you will massively reduce the number of times you'll need to see a word to fully acquire it and use it in conversation. But you still need to see that word in many contexts to fully make it a part of you. Let me illustrate how important this is with a little story. Imagine walking into a random party where you know nobody and someone comes up to you and tells you their name. They talk about themselves in a boring way for a minute or two and then they leave. Now, it's highly likely you'll have forgotten that person by the end of the night. But now imagine that you walk into a party held by your best friend that you've known since childhood. The party is filled with people you've known all your life, and your best friend introduces you to someone, a 6'10" man with a pink suit and a huge charming smile. And that man asks you questions about yourself, and you find you have tons in common with each other. In fact, you went to the same school, and you even read a book that this man had written that really helped your business. Now, even if you never met that man again, it's likely you would remember the encounter for many years, perhaps even the rest of your life. And that's what the first step in this video does for you in terms of learning Chinese words. However, you don't know that man in the pink suit yet. This will take more meetings in more context, and so it is with words. Some words, just like people, are deeper, with more nuances that you'll build on over time. Others are shallower and easier to understand and don't require much effort or time to get in their entirety. I see Chinese words as like bars that need to be filled. The density of connections, the level of personalizations, and the quality of the context and the frequency of the review determine how much and how fast that bar fills up. And once you do fill that bar up past a certain point, that word becomes a part of you, pretty much unforgettable. Now, if you're a beginner, you'll start by learning pronunciation and characters, then you'll find example sentences using your target words to understand how they are used in context. Make sure you are immersing consistently every day in material that you can roughly understand and preferably also enjoy. Now, if doing that, plus everything else I've talked about in this video so far, by yourself sounds daunting, then check out our suite of courses, the Blueprint, in the description below, and we'll guide you every step of the way from where you are now to pretty much any level of Chinese you want. You can also check out these 2 videos here for pronunciation and learning characters if you'd like to try and get there on your own.